Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles, and welcome to my Family Office TV. Being creative in business and the impact of AI. If I had to give it a subtitle today, thinking as a revolutionary in business. We have a special guest. It's Professor Jeremy Utley. He's a world-leading expert on creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship. He's an adjunct professor at Stanford University, a general partner at Freespin Capital Partners, and the author of a new book, Idea Flow, the only business metric that matters, which landed him on the Thinkers 50 Top 10 Innovation Leaders list to watch in 2023. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Angelo. Nice to be here.
So this is a topic that I'm very interested in. And I think in my world of finance and family offices and billionaires and the ultra rich, it's probably not spoken about enough. So someone of your prominence, it's a pleasure to have you on. I'm going to start with, to lay the foundation, what does creativity mean to you?
Well, I will say this. I thought for a long time it meant not me. I'm a finance guy by training. I went to the University of Texas for undergrad, hook 'em. I love a good pivot table and a DCF calculation, and just a great spreadsheet makes my heart sing. I married a fashion designer who used to take inspo trips to Paris, to be inspired. I thought it was just a boondoggle to get macarons, right? So when I first encountered the kind of concept of creativity, I would say professionally, the way that it resonated with me was, that's not me, that's Michelle. She's the creative one. I'm the analyst. I'm the number cruncher, etc. Over the last 15 years teaching at Stanford, I've obviously been disabused of that mindset. I believe wholeheartedly that creativity is an inherent, innate human capacity that every single one of us can grow or will atrophy with either attention or with neglect. And my favorite, last thing I'll say, and then I'd love to hear whatever resonates with you. My favorite definition of creativity, my second favorite is Arthur Koestler, the Hungarian philosopher, said it's the collision of apparently unrelated frames of reference. I love that. We could talk about that at length. But my favorite definition actually comes from a 7th grader in Ohio who wrote on a little Post-it in her classroom, creativity is doing more than the first thing you think of. And that's actually my favorite definition for 2 reasons. One, it doesn't have anything to do with the arts. And 2, it speaks to a fundamental cognitive bias that plagues almost everyone when it comes to generating meaningful solutions to the problem that they face. And so some unknown 7th grader in Ohio said something that's more profound than a famous Hungarian philosopher, in my opinion.
I love it. Honestly, a slap in the face to me about a minute ago when you said University of Texas. I'll put it this way: go Sooners.
I was born in Tulsa, if it's any consolation.
Okay, that helps just a little bit. And of course, I'll remind the audience that in last year's Red River rivalry, we understand who won, the Crimson and White, of course. But who knows? You got Arch Manning. What the future might hold.
It's a wonderful rivalry. My grandparents actually live in Stillwater, so they're big OSU fans.
That's right in it.
Yeah.
Well, the enemy, but that's okay. It's all good. Why not? If we all liked the same team and did the same things, it wouldn't be so exciting. It's the challenge and the friendly camaraderie and rivalry that makes things interesting.
Absolutely.
Back a little bit to creativity. Do we have, and this we're going to get into parents and upbringing and all that, but I think this relates to it. Do we generally have self-limiting beliefs that hold us back?
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. I see this all the time at Stanford. I mean, if you think about where the design school sits as kind of an interdisciplinary hub of innovation at Stanford. And so we teach business school students, law school students, medical school students, engineers. The first class I taught back in 2009 had graduate students from every single graduate program at Stanford in it. Okay. And almost categorically, if you ask the classroom, raise your hand if you're creative, maybe 5% of the class, maybe 1 out of 20. So if it's a 40-person class, a couple of people raise their
And
hands.
this is
And then
Stanford.
this
Stanford.
is Stanford.
And
Yeah. And
only
they're looking over
5%.
their shoulders, hoping that nobody is seeing that they're raising their hand, right?
True.
Because they think we've learned to prize analytical thinking and reasoning and creativity. It seems like it belongs in the realm of the arts, and it belongs in the realm of the fuzzy, and nobody who's doing kind of hard scientific work wants to even think about the possibility of anything that can't be perfectly explained by, measurement, et cetera. And increasingly, creativity itself is able to be measured and explained by, there's some fascinating studies we can get into if you want to, but needless to say, there are countless, I would say, not only self-limiting beliefs, but actually just cognitive biases that keep us from being able to realize our creative possibilities.
We're going to get to all of that, but I wanted to set the groundwork. I'm going to give an option 1 and an option 2. And I want to be very clear, so I am going to look down a little bit and read it. One of my thoughts that I'm working on. We have the capability of original thoughts, a sequence that no one who's ever lived, billions and billions, ever thought of ever, or is reality, not to be negative, a little bit of option 2. No human being is capable of true original thought. All of our knowledge is obtained through the exploration, experimentation of inputs that we receive, formulating our thoughts from others that begin at a very young age. Is it a little bit of a combination, or does it skew to the more favorable option 1 or the reality of option 2?
I would say it's both. I think it's a false dichotomy.
Mhm.
I think fundamentally we are all capable of what is original to us. I think there's a scientific principle of what's called multiples, where it's been documented some 140 or 150 times throughout history that scientific discoveries happen in parallel at approximately the same time with no input or correspondence between scientists, which is to say there's a notion of what's called the adjacent say that the realm of possibility, to easy example, no one can imagine a refrigerator without electricity. Okay. So, but once electricity comes online, refrigeration becomes part of the adjacent possible, right? All of a sudden it's conceivable. And so this notion or phenomenon of multiples is a reflection of that reality, that as technology progresses, as humankind's knowledge unfolds, there's kind of a frontier, if you will, of what constitutes the adjacent possible. And the fact that multiple people in hundreds of cases throughout human history have, quote unquote, discovered the same thing, totally independent of one another, speaks to, one, individuals' ability to discover, and two, the fact that we're all working from somewhat at least the same Lego bag of cognitive building blocks. When we think of ideas, like if you ask me what's creativity, ask me what's an idea.
What is an idea, Jeremy?
So an idea is not new. People have this mistaken belief that an idea is not new universally. It's new in my mind because it's a new connection. An idea is a new connection. It's a connection of component parts. So simple example, I've got a friend who works at a electric vehicle company, which will remain nameless. They've been working on this challenge of what's known as range anxiety for a long time. A lot of people feel it. You don't know how far you're going to get on a charge, right? She told me she's been working on this challenge. She was at Pete's the other day, and there's a couple of folks in military fatigues who walk in, and she said, I couldn't help myself. I was just eavesdropping. I said, that's a great creative strategy. Eavesdrop away. And she said, as they were talking, I realized they were talking about this concept of what's known as mid-air refueling. You've seen it in Maverick. A fighter jet has a small fuel tank, and they'll actually send another jet while it's en route to refuel it. And she said, while I was listening to them, I realized there's a solution to the range anxiety problem. And any listener, and you, Angelo, anyone who's basically conscious right now just had an idea. We had a collective hallucination called an idea. Have you thought about a mid-drive? Yeah, we all thought of that, right? Why? Because these two conceptual building blocks, range anxiety and mid-air refueling, came close enough together that in all of our minds, they snapped together. And the feeling that we had, this rush of endorphins of idea, is actually associated with a connection, importantly, between two things we already know. You already knew about range anxiety. You already knew about mid-air refueling. But those two pieces had never been brought close enough together that they snap together. And it turns out, the human brain cannot create from scratch. Period. We cannot create from nothing. So the notion that the kind of prevalent notion that ideas come from nothing is absurd, because we cannot create from nothing. We create from component parts. We create from conceptual building blocks. And when people realize that creation and generating ideas is a function of novel combinations, that's why the Kessler quote, creativity is the collision of apparently unrelated frames of reference. Collision there being the operative word, among other unrelated, is also very interesting. But the collision or the connection that occurs is actually what sparks the idea. And that, to your kind of, is A or B true? While I believe that everyone, A, is capable of having ideas that are breakthroughs and that are truly original to them, etc., I also believe that B is true, that we're all building from basically the same cognitive building blocks. And I disbelieve, like, the thought of 0 to 1 is laughable to me. You know, I realize it's a popular book, Peter Thiel, it's a great book, actually. I really like it. But the mistake people make when they speak about 0 to 1 is they assume they started at 0. And my belief is actually no one starts at 0. Everyone has conceptual building blocks. I'll give one example. Bette Nesmith Graham. Do you know that name?
What was the name again?
Bette Nesmith Graham.
No, I was going to bring up Paul Graham later, who you would know in your backyard, but not that
Of course. So Bette Nesmith Graham, she's a single mom in Dallas, Texas in the mid-50s, 1954, 56. She was a typist at Texas Bank and Trust, and she was constantly frustrated by this newfangled technology called a typewriter, because it's supposed to make her life easier, but it's putting smudges on pages. It's driving her crazy. She's constantly frustrated. And because she's a single mom, she's got to, work odd jobs and weekend jobs to make ends meet, right? One weekend, she's painting a window display at a department store in Dallas. And as she's painting, she made a mistake, and she takes a straight edge and she starts kind of scraping the paint off. And the painter runs over to Bette Nesmith Graham and says, whoa, what are you doing? And she said, oh, I'm just erasing this. He said, no, painters don't erase their mistakes. Painters paint over their mistakes. And for probably 100 people, they just go, oh, clever. For Bette Nesmith Graham, because she had been annoyed by her typewriter and how much time she spent erasing, an idea occurred to her. What if I painted over the smudges? And that was the origin of liquid paper, whiteout.
Wow.
Bette Nesmith Graham went on to found what was hundreds of millions of dollars of value by that happenstance comment that this painter said outside of a department store on her weekend job. Point being, where does liquid paper come from? It doesn't come from nowhere. And Bette Nesmith Graham, if anybody started at 0, she's a single mom having to have side hustles to make ends meet. Surely she starts at 0. And yet what I know as an innovation expert is she had a unique knowledge of a problem to be solved. She had a unique frustration. And I would say, you've got, billionaires as your audience. I would say to the folks who aren't billionaires, you might go, I don't have means, I don't have the ability, but I would say you have a unique knowledge of problems to be solved in your life. What are the frustrations? We've, since the 1960s at Stanford, we've been telling students, keep a bug list. And that doesn't mean write down a list of errors in code. What it means is write down a list of the things that bug you. Because we know that if you write down the things that bug you, if you attend to your annoyances, you end up courting the muse. You end up being the person who has ideas and solutions because of an awareness of problems, which is to say, again, nobody starts at 0. Because if you're living in the world, you're facing problems. And if you are eager, gathering those problems like Lego blocks, like conceptual building blocks that could fuel a future innovation, then you've got an advantage for sure.
Relating to my options A or B in your follow up, and it's going to sound similar, but I think there's nuances to it as we could dig a little deeper into that. We create novel thought ideas and concepts based on information effectively a little more like my option B, somewhat known to us. So, in some ways, nothing may be truly original. You noted our capability of thinking of original thought is, again, it's, let's go with the word, a fallacy. And this is going to relate to a comment actually by Paul Graham coming up shortly that's going to tie things in. But this does relate to a question. I know it's going to sound out of left field, but welcome to my world and my podcast. And I do not consider myself creative. We're going to get to that shortly because I want to be more creative. But when we're born and we're a child, I mean, I look at it now as, I hope, a moderately smart adult. Learning a second or third language is kind of hard. Yet I believe I was reading even those with deemed to be lower IQ, even in countries where language we deem to be incredibly complicated, like Iceland, practically even lower IQ to a degree is able to learn a complex language at a young age, being effectively a toddler, not knowing really much in terms of inputs from their parents. Now, that may be more of an IQ question than a creative question, but that concept always intrigued me, and I want to know how that ties together.
The question of IQ, or what's the
As
question more
babies,
specifically?
we're able to learn something incredibly complex without giving it a second thought. And then somehow later in life, that becomes harder. Does that relate more to IQ, or does that relate more to a variety of factors, including the capability of idea flow and creativity?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I would say the challenge, we think of smart and genius. We think genius is a little bit smarter than smart, right? It's like we think of a spectrum. It's like you're not, you're kind of normal, you're intelligent, you're smart, you're a genius. We think about it like it's on a spectrum, and we place genius as just smarter than smart. What I resonate with what Walter Isaacson, who's a CEO, he was former CEO of Time and CNN and the Aspen Institute, author of Da Vinci and
Many great
Franklin.
ones.
Yeah. One thing he said that I really resonate with is smart people are a dime a dozen and often don't amount to much. What counts is being creative and imaginative. And what that did for me, because he's describing the geniuses that he's written about, the Steve Jobs, the Ben Franklin, the Ada Lovelace, the Leonardo da Vinci, et cetera, et cetera. And what he noticed there is smart isn't what counts. And there's actually been research, Frederick Terman at Stanford, he conducted a longitudinal study of IQ. He did this special, you can look it up. It's fascinating. The kind of TLDR of the study is that the study failed to produce a single noteworthy piece of culture or literature or scientific breakthrough. He had errors of all sorts of mathematical and scientific geniuses. He only allowed people in this study whose IQ crossed a certain threshold. And yet the entire longitudinal study failed to produce what anyone would call it genius contribution. And to me, it speaks to this fallacy that there's something genetically different, like we see LeBron James play basketball. We go, I can't do that. I don't know how tall LeBron is, but he's taller than me. He's a lot stronger than me. He's a lot more athletic than me. And it's easy for me to go, well, that's a genetic difference that I can't compete there. I think we look at somebody like Steve Jobs and we can similarly say, well, he has like an extra DNA strand, or something. That's how he came up with the iPod. But the truth is, I actually have a bonus chapter on my website. If you go to jeremyutley.design, you can get a bonus chapter called How to Think Like Bezos and Jobs. Totally free, because I had so many Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos stories. I saw so many parallels as I studied the history of recent innovation. But one of the things that Steve Jobs did, if you look at, he's a singular contributor to the body of innovation in our world today. And Sir Johnny Ive at his memorial address said, Steve used to say this a lot. He used to say, hey, Johnny, here's a dopey idea. And most of the time they were pretty dopey. In fact, sometimes they were truly terrible. but every once in a while they'd take the air out of the room. And I go, okay, what made Steve Jobs different? Was it his extra DNA strand? No, it's how he thought. How he thought made him a breakthrough thinker. And how, which is different than how LeBron plays basketball makes him a breakthrough. No, there's a lot there that I can't attain or access. What I can do is learn to, what did Steve Jobs do? He regularly shared bad ideas. Do I do that? No, no, no. I only want to have good ideas. Well, how did Steve Jobs do it? He regularly shared bad ideas. Taylor Swift, the queen herself, you know, depending on your position on the Beyonce, Taylor Swift, you know, spectrum. But, you know, she received an innovator award recently. You know what she said at this like iHeart Music Innovation Awards? The direct quote, I really want young people to know that it's the hundreds or thousands of dumb ideas that I've had that have led me to my good ideas. Why would she say that? She would say that because she knows that in a world that focuses on IQ and being smart, we tend to neglect the dumb stuff geniuses do. Seemingly dumb, I mean. It's actually brilliant. It's actually breakthrough. If you want to get delightful ideas, dumb is the price of delightful. Dopey is the price of delightful. The way Steve Jobs got to delight is by dopey. The way Taylor Swift gets to shake it off is by dumb. And you and I, we want the iPod outcome. We want the shake it off outcome, but we're unwilling to have the hundreds or thousands of bad ideas.
Have you found that people that generally are what we deem to be creative, you mentioned a couple of them, Taylor Swift as a musical artist, Steve Jobs, how can I say this without swearing? I'll clean it up a little bit. They don't care what other people think of them or their ideas.
I think I would say it slightly differently. And I'll back it up with a study. My direct answer to your question is they have learned not to care what they think. And I'll back it up with a study. Dr. Charles Lem is a neuroscientist, neurologist at Johns Hopkins, or now maybe he's in the UC system. He was at Johns Hopkins when he did this study. He was curious about the question of what happens when someone enters a creative flow state. So you take a musician, they're playing known bars, they're playing Shake It Off on the keyboard. That's not creative flow. Maybe they're into it, whatever. But when they improvise, they have to enter into a creative flow state, similar to a hip hop artist. You know, Jay-Z, when he's reciting known bars, that's not creative flow. But when he is improvising and freestyling, that's creative flow. And so Dr. Lim, because he had access to technologies like fMRI scanners, he can actually look at the brain. And what he said is, what happens in the brain when somebody goes from reciting known or playing known bars to improvisation? Well, part of the brain turns on, right? And what was fascinating was not what part of the brain turns on, but what part of the brain turns off. And the part of the brain that turns off when an improviser enters a free flow stage or a hip hop artist starts improvising, the part of the brain that turns off is the part of the brain responsible for judgment and criticism.
That's great.
They literally stop judging, which is to say, when you asked me a moment ago, Steve Jobs and Taylor Swift is what makes them different. They just don't care what other people think. No. They don't care what they think. They've learned it's not mine to judge. And I think a lot of us really wrestle with, I just want the right answer. I just want to do the right thing. And because of that obsession with just being right, or really, honestly, Ari Kruglowski, a Russian philosopher, just calls it just cognitive closure. Just, I want to close on it. It's distressing to leave something unresolved. So we just want an answer. And we often, what Herbert Simon in his 1954 Nobel Prize winning research called satisficing, we satisfy and suffice on just the good enough solution. We do this because we just rather be done. And I think what distinguishes Taylor Swift and Steve Jobs is not that they don't care what other people think, but they don't want to satisfy for good enough. And whereas a lot of times people will take a statement like, don't be satisfied with good enough, and they'll send it in the direction of perfectionism. What Steve Jobs and Taylor Swift did is they said, no, I don't want to settle for good enough. I'm going to reduce the quality threshold substantially first in ideation. Obviously, no iPhone is being shipped out without the perfect polish and all that. It's like, it's going to get perfected. But the question is, are we perfecting the right thing? And for a lot of people and a lot of organizations, they're perfecting the good enough thing, not the exceptional thing. And the way to perfect it is very different from the way of generating the thing worth perfecting. And, Taylor Swift, it goes through, I'm sure, rounds and rounds and rounds of production on the song that she got because she wrote a ton of really bad songs.
And this is going to sound like it's off topic. I actually think it relates to what you just said. It popped in my mind when you mentioned Bezos. So, among the work that I do is creating family offices and usually more restructuring, reimagining, productivity enhancements. One of the things that I quote and that I utilize, it's a Bezos quote, and basically it's speed up, let's go. What you think you're self-limiting is going to take a week or 20 days, why don't you do it in an hour or one day? So I'm not going to ask as much about that part, but I think that's very important. But he implies opportunities come and go. Well, but suppose we move quickly on something, we didn't do enough diligence. Well, putting on your VC hat, we often know the more inputs you get on entrepreneurs or a company, actually, often the worse investment and decisions you make. I've seen it with hedge fund managers. I've seen it with others. I'm partially based in Greenwich, Connecticut, so I understand a little bit about that. The big point that he brings up is, yes, you're sometimes going to move too quick and you're going to be wrong. But one, you're going to learn. And two, the opportunities you're going to get from coming in earlier and being faster are going to be worth it than the times you have to either stop or adapt or iterate in terms of what you're doing. So how does speed, and I was very long-winded, I'm sorry.
No,
Speaking
I
of
love
speed,
it.
I wasn't speedy. How does speed, quickness in decision-making, moving forward, adapting as you go along, how does that play into creativity and quote unquote into business from your perspective?
Oh, it's critical. Velocity of experimentation is critical. When we think about idea flow, it's one thing to generate a volume of ideas. It's another thing to say, how quickly can we learn which are good? That is a function of the velocity of experimentation. And for most organizations, even though they struggle with, or business people for that matter, even if they struggle with a volume of ideas, when it comes to experimentation, experiments or pilots or whatever are expensive, they're slow, they're bureaucratic, which is to say that they become the bottleneck for the rate of innovation. If you can't experiment quickly, scrappily, cheaply, learn quickly, fail quickly, realize that everybody hates the Silicon Valley mantra, but I had Amy Edmondson on my podcast recently. She talks a lot about intelligent failure and the value of the right kind of wrong, so to speak. And that's where, it's true of Bezos. You look at, what Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph did at Netflix. I mean, what Mark Randolph is, he's spoken very eloquently about this. It wasn't about having good ideas. It was about building a system for testing lots of bad ideas quickly. That's what they did. And they discovered what worked by being in discovery mode. And being in discovery, experimentation is the best way for any individual or organization to get into discovery mode.
I mean, another thing that I talk about in family offices, they're often lacking a little bit of direction. So I talk about that you should be a historian, you should understand history, the greats in history, how they processed information, how they make decisions. And sometimes I give a football analogy. If you're a football fan, I look at someone like Coach Belichick, who now is retired for 1 year, that won't last too long, as being an incredible historian. And actually, per I think his father's background and his educational background, that's exactly true. And I do think being a historian is very valuable, but I do think they need to have some, I don't know if it's 5% or 30%, they have to have some revolutionary in them. And I define that, and how can you bring this back to creativity and bring it back into the world, perhaps of finance and family offices, as you have to see around corners. I know we don't have a crystal ball, but could you extrapolate based on your intellect, your experiences, how you process information, and how you make decisions? Could you actually see around corners?
Well, as William Gibson said, the future's already here. It's just unevenly distributed. So you just right. So you just have to know where to look. And and when you start to see the world as a lab for experimentation, I think folks like, I haven't studied Belichick deeply, but there's a system there that, I mean, to your point about studying history, they've tried and experimented and practiced. There's a great documentary series that I watched where there's one key kind of pivotal play. They had practiced that exact thing 100 times. And this pivotal play where nobody knew this thing was going to happen, Belichick did, perhaps because of his study of history. But then what did he do? He had a system for making it his knowledge of history a part of the muscle memory of his team, so that when this particular event unfolded on the battlefield, as it were, they all knew exactly what to do. And so there's a question of systems and sharing and knowledge sharing. But then to your point about seeing around corners, that's why we talk about, engaging with extreme users. You're really seeking to understand because on the fringes of the bell curve, folks tend to feel things more pointedly, needs that are felt more latently across kind of the average of the population. Look at what Airbnb has done. You know how they started? They were renting an airbed in their own place in San Francisco to help make ends meet and pay their rent, because there was a big conference in town. And so they were literally, they didn't have a room to rent. All they had was an airbed. That's it. And they gave a bowl of cereal in the morning and they called it Air Bed and Breakfast. Airbnb, right? It's literally an airbed and a bowl of cereal, right? And then they spent a lot of cycles on like making the cereal box funnier, and right, a lot of wasted cycles. But the point is, they were working with this fringe need. They weren't trying to reinvent travel, okay? And large hospitality companies, they're looking at the bell curve. They look in the middle of the bell curve. They say, what do business travelers want? It's great. That's fine for incrementally innovating that existing offer. When it comes to reinventing and disrupting and doing something radically different, if for finance folks, it's like, where is the alpha? It's on the edge of the bell curve. It's where the future is. And how do you see around corners? Well, you design for the edges, and you find ways to seek out extreme users whose needs are felt more pointedly, so that you can be inspired to design for a need that may be felt more broadly across the population. And so that, I think, it's a skill set that, it's a capability. I mean, ultimately the case we're trying to make in Idea Flow is innovation is not an event. It's not a bolt of lightning. It's not a moment in time. It's a practice. It's a capability. It's an ability that you have to grow individually and collectively. And leaders need to be equipping their teams with the abilities of innovation and giving practice. You go back to, Belichick or sports analogy. Think about world-class. Steph is obviously my favorite, but choose your favorite. How much time does Steph spend practicing versus performing? What percentage? It's probably 90-10, right?
Right.
90% of his time is spent practicing. What percent of your time, family office manager, do you spend practicing?
I would assume the average is easily the converse of that, and that's being generous.
Yeah. And so why are we surprised we don't know new plays, that we don't run new plays? The alley-oop is not an active improvisation in the moment of the game. It's a well-rehearsed, well-practiced phenomenon that practice has enabled, right? Players are growing in confidence in one another. Players are growing in trust in their own abilities. Players are building kind of muscle memory and instincts and all these things, right? Similarly, when it comes to innovation, for leaders to say, everybody start innovating, it's like, good luck. What you need to do is you need to treat it like a capability. You need to treat it like a practice, and you need to cultivate that.
Indeed. And by the way, audience, I have a lot of questions. We may be a little bit limited on time. I'm going to try to stretch Jeremy if I could get above the top of the hour. And AI, I promise, is going to be a part of it. I actually think this is a important foundation, because I could argue the AI part to some degree we could cover in 5 minutes. I'm not discounting it, and it is the future. I get it. But this is what leads to a lot of that. I'm going to bring up Bezos again, because you brought him up per my bringing him up, and now another question popped in my head. I believe he's known, and you could bring this back to creativity. You get, and I think this comes from the also from the inspiration to the show Mad Men, and something to the effect of the one pizza rule, meaning if we get too many people trying to iterate on an idea or bring creativity to the table, 15, 20 people in the room, nothing's going to happen. If you need more than one pizza, which probably implies 2 or 3 people, it's too many. Therefore, when you're either thinking of a so-called creative idea or iterating on one, are you better off doing it following the quote unquote simply one box of pizza rule?
Mhm. Yeah, no, I mean, there's so much there, by the way. Yeah, that's an organizational paradigm that he ushered in. The phrase is two pizza team, right? Two pizza team. It can't be bigger than, the ability to split two pizzas across the team. And that actually he got from Bill Gates, and he got it he got from borrowing a tactic from Bill Gates. Bill Gates once a year goes on a think week and he reads books and things like that. And Bezos borrowed that tactic from Bill Gates, or you could say stole, depending on how you want to think about it. But he started going away for a week to think and to read. And it was in that week, as he was contemplating the challenges of moving quickly in the organization, that he hit upon that organizational construct called the two pizza team. And he came back from his week in the woods going, no, there will be no teams bigger than what can split two pizzas in order to be able to move quickly and deploy experiments and learn at the kind of speed that we need to learn.
Got it. And yes, with people like myself being half Italian, you will need 2 pizzas, even for only 2 or 3 people, because we're going to eat a lot of slices, of course.
Mhm.
Back in the
Mhm.
day in the 60s, with the inspiration from Mad Men, they were leaner and probably had less pizza.
Mhm.
This really brings into an important question to some degree that I wanted to ask earlier, but get sidetracked. And I think it was still important to build a foundation. And it could be for some a little bit of a sensitive issue, parenting. So again, I gave the analogy of even so-called a low IQ may be able to learn a complex language at quote unquote a very young age. I don't know, 2, 2.5, or 3, or at least the fostering of it and being conversational within a year or 2 after that. What impact, and I know they're well-meaning, don't get me wrong, I'm a parent, my son is 20. What impact as a parent do we have on helping to foster the inner idea flow and creativity? And in reality, do we often indirectly, including teachers and others, pound that out of them? Fall in line, be a conformist. It's easier for me to teach if we're all following the same curriculum. I'm the one at the front of the classroom. I'm the one teaching. You all follow our schedule. And I get it. To some degree, that does provide value and structure, but I don't think that allows for the creativity. Now, I could bring in Montessori schools, the impact that they've had going back decades. There's a lot to unpack here, and we probably have relatively limited time, relatively. What would be your answer to that?
I think that I'm a father of 4,
Wow.
and I think we have enormous impact on our kids' creativity. I was fortunate to have some of my children attend there's something like a Montessori school on Stanford's campus called Bing Nursery School. It's one of the most advanced centers for preschool learning, and it hasn't changed in 60 or 70 years. and, um, and one of the things and I learned a lot from going to open houses there and watching teachers there and things like that. And one of the things I learned was cultivating a sense of wonder in our children. There is, why is the sky blue? There is an answer to that question. Is it my job to answer it immediately? One of the things I observed really gifted instructors at this school do is say, why do you think it's blue? Well, that's interesting. Why else could it be blue? That's interesting. And what I notice is it's something like hypothesis formulation, right? They're cultivating in a child the ability to generate potential answers themselves. And that's just one example, but which is to say, in as simple of an interaction as when a child asks a question with a known answer, how do I respond? Almost always, or we're on a walk and a child wants to look at a flower. How do I respond? We are almost always defaulting towards expediency. We're almost always defaulting towards, we got to get this done. We've always got a plan. We've always got a schedule. And what that robs our children of is that kind of mind wandering boredom possibility. Now with devices, I mean, Jonathan Haidt's work and, the anxious generation, it's a really important piece of research, I think, to realize the impact of the prevalence of technology and social media in our kids' lives. I mean, I think it's somewhat prescient that Steve Jobs, the inventor of the iPad, wouldn't allow his children to use the iPad. And yet now what we see is, I mean, I can't go to a restaurant without, even very small children. It's like it's an e-pacifier. They've all got a screen in front of them. And on the one hand, you go to the parents, they have a chance to talk. That's great. And their kid's not making noise. That's great. But it's very expedient for kind of an efficiency oriented world. And what I know about innovation, kind of bringing this back full circle, innovation's not efficient. Your job is not to be efficient that's a oxymoron. Efficient innovation is an oxymoron. Your job is to be effective, and to know what's effective in cultivating innovation oftentimes doesn't feel efficient. I mean, one of my favorite examples, Amos Tversky, Danny Kahneman's research partner. They reinvented the field of behavioral, of psychology and economic theory, literally rewrote the foundations of economic theory. Every single person who manages money here has been affected by their research, right? So they're truly profound, and they came to their insights, their Nobel caliber insights, through a series of wildly inventive experiments that if you read the experiment, you go, how'd you even think of testing that? That's amazing, right? Let alone the outcome. And someone asked Amos Tversky once, how do you and Danny do it? You're such good researchers. How do you do it? You know what Amos Tversky said?
No.
This is a direct quote. The secret to doing good research is to always be a little underemployed. You waste years when you can't afford to waste hours.
Yes, that almost goes a little bit to the speed question from earlier.
And yeah, if you don't have capacity to waste time, and by the way, cycles that don't work seem like a waste. And if you don't have time to waste, you won't do cycles that don't work. You'll only do things that you know will work, which is not an experiment, because an experiment has to be able to fail in order to be an experiment, right? But going back to Tversky and this idea of efficiency, and why do I bring that up? Because of parenting, our default orientation with parenting is always efficiency. Like, I mean, I know from my own life, it's like, we're trying to do this. We got to get here on time. We got to do this thing. We got to get dinner. We got to pick somebody up, whatever. And that obsession tends to thwart the creative impulse, and is not an environment that is conducive to our own creativity, let alone our children's. And there are moments where we can introduce a little bit of inefficiency, and that's the way to introduce creativity. Instead of answering the question, ask them to wonder about it. Entertain their wild answers for why the sky is blue. Allow yourself to wonder wrong answers too. That, to me, is actually going to demonstrate values that are far more important potentially than being on time to the dinner.
I had a parent in my community, and I tried to implement some of what he did, but not as successfully. But I tried. And basically, and I'm simplifying it a little bit, coming back from school or when he met up after he came from work, the question was, what did you fail at today? Implying, and we kind of indirectly spoke about this a little bit earlier about not giving an F about this or about that. How are you going to learn? I mean, you're not interacting. You want to sit in a chair in your basement all day and not interact with people, then you're not going to fail, I guess, depending on what your definition is, but you're not going to thrive. You're not going to succeed. Should we be asking more often, what did you fail at today? Or maybe positioning that a little differently. What did you fail at? What did you learn from it? And what are you doing differently moving forward?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think especially for leaders, you want to know good questions you can ask your team to drive innovation. What are we doing wrong? What have we failed? And either that's gonna do one of two things. It's going to surface problems that deserve innovative solutions, or it's going to demonstrate the experiments that are necessary on the pathway to learning. If the answer is nothing, we're one, delusional, but two, we're in deep trouble because that means we aren't doing broadly enough and we aren't aware of problems, right? So what are we doing wrong is a great question. I remember that Seth Godin told me once that the founder of Sleepy's mattress store, he had 80 stores and he would call every store every day and say, what's broken? And if they did not have an answer to that question, they were in trouble. And he was just maniacal about, just like find what's broken, fix it, find what's broken, fix it, find what's broken, fix it. I love that. And I think that when we don't tolerate failure, we don't enable learning. And
Exactly.
so what we have to do, especially in the realm of innovation, I'm not saying like we want planes to crash. We can define where things fail. Like I don't want the pilots experimenting in the cockpit with like new landing procedures when they got 500 people on the plane, right? But there are flight simulators and they should be crashing and learning in flight simulators, right? In order to make our flight safety. It's funny, actually, the areas where we think experimentation is not tolerated, there's actually specifically designed experimentation vehicles, right? It's kind of fascinating, which speaks to the value of experimentation as a learning mechanism. But
100%.
What's that?
Agree 100%. Before we follow up, and I have to streamline my questions, would you have passed the top of the hour, so to 1:15 Eastern?
Yeah, I've got it. I would say let's shoot for 1:10.
Okay, I'm going to keep it going a little bit then.
Yeah, sure.
Could I say that creativity begins with the power of observation? I'll continue. My experience interviewing billionaires, being a researcher, doing what I do, a dislocation, maybe not too bad, but a dislocation early in their life often results in them being able to observe and envision paths that others don't see. Could I make the point? The opposite of quote unquote creativity is contentment. So I don't mean that we should suffer or the kids of rich parents need to suffer, but I don't know. In some ways, is there value in a challenge that could be a little grave or a dislocation early in life that causes us to observe things differently?
Yeah, I think so. I love that quote. The opposite of creativity is contentment. I think that's the creative impulse is actually born of a certain degree of discontent.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And again, I know we probably want to dive deeper into each of the nuances of the questions, but given that I would actually rather go a little voluminous, so we still have to cover AI, we're going to move along. Bringing it to business and even what are going to be jobs for students, even at Stanford moving forward, honestly, a lot of people could so-called crunch numbers. And technology and AI, given the fact that that's more linear, that's like you have no chance to compete with that. Therefore, we need to solve problems. Is that solely the power of your born intellect and IQ? Or is solving problems, how does that relate to creativity? And how can we become better at solving problems?
Very simply, creativity is often, I think, most powerfully expressed when it comes to solving problems. I think what most of our problems need is a volume of solutions. I mean, what we found is the number of ideas you need to generate to get a good solution to a problem is way more than people think. If I ask you how many solutions do you need to have a commercially viable new product, you say 20, 30, 40, it's 2,000. It's like way more than you think. Orders of magnitude more than you think. So volume of potential solutions is actually, it's the single greatest variable that affects the quality of your ideas is the quantity of your ideas.
Wow.
So you could say the single greatest variable that affects the quality of your solutions is the quantity of your solutions. So if you're trying to solve a problem, and just going back to parenting, I had this true story, hashtag real life, the Real Housewives of Stanford, California. We live in a 115-year-old home here. And one of our daughters, for the seemingly thousandth time, slammed a door and she broke a 115-year-old window. And we go, okay, what do we do? Well, this is a problem in need of a solution. The solution being how we're going to provide guidance to the family, consequences, punishment, etc. In that moment, thankfully, I said to my wife jokingly, Thankfully, I'm a professional problem solver, right? Because that's what creativity is. That's what innovation is. It's effective problem solving. And what we were able to do is we were able to come up with a really novel solution. And the way we did it was we told ourselves, start with 10. What are 10 possible ways to deal with this situation? Because we know the cognitive bias at play here is we got to make a decision. We got to do something about this. I said, let's wait. I call it try 10. Let's try 10. 10 ideas before we do anything, right? And by the way, that's not say it has to take a long time because we're going to hem and haw trying to think of one thing for 5 minutes. So instead, we reduce the threshold, we reduce the barriers of perfection, come up with 10 ideas. The ninth idea is actually kind of cool, kind of amazing, right? But the point is, creativity is problem solving. When you need problem, what you need is creative solutions to the problem. And I think, just turning to AI for a moment, the opportunity with AI is we now have a partner who's capable of boundless creativity, who's capable of try 100, try 1,000, right? And yet, myself and a co-research, Kian Gohar from Singularity University, we conducted a study that was published in Harvard Business Review just this month, where we studied the impact of generative AI on teams' ability to solve problems in organizations. And what we found was, despite the potential for AI to generate many more and better solutions for these teams, theoretically, yet in practice, teams actually generated fewer and on average worse ideas than their non-AI assisted teams because of this cognitive bias towards satisficing, towards just getting to good enough as quickly as possible. And what happens is AI actually gets you a good enough answer faster and the team doesn't push and they don't converse. And so we call it a fix-it model. We have a short website, howtofixit.ai, HOWTOFIXIT. And we say fix it because we recommend kind of a 5-step model. Have a focused problem, ideate individually first, give it sufficient context, interact iteratively, and then use your team to incubate and select the best ideas. But that FIXIT model totally changes the default posture of a team towards AI. Whereas before, often teams go to AI as an oracle. It'll give us the answer. No, it won't. What you need is to treat AI like a thought partner. And if you treat AI like a thought partner, AI will dramatically enhance your own ability to identify the best solution. But it requires a behavioral change, not on behalf of the technology, but on behalf of the human being.
There are some people that may not be as so-called action-oriented. They actually may be too analytical and they feel they need to understand it before they utilize it. When I think back 30 plus years ago, I'm pretty old, to the beginning of the internet, I didn't overthink it. I used it. When I get on a plane, I don't exactly know the mechanics of aerodynamics. I utilize it. Actually, do sometimes higher IQ people or people that are more right-brained and analytical, or is it actually left-brained and analytical, they tend to overthink things.
I think it's overthinking is a manifestation of a desire for perfection, for being right, for not being wrong. And we've been, go back to Dr. Charles Lim's research. We've been conditioned to be critical. We haven't been, and Dr. Charles Lim, if you remember the fMRI study that showed that improvisers stopped judging. So if you think about kind of type A people as like they're overthinking it, to use a phrase, and it seems like an insult, but it's not. You could say that Dr. Lim in his fMRI studies of jazz musicians and freestyle hip hop artists accused them of underthinking, for lack of a better word. It went insofar as thinking is judging, insofar as thinking is criticizing. And what I would say is I graduated top of my class. I went to Stanford Business School. I worked at the, top management consulting firm in the world, on and on and on, right? My tendency is to overvalue my critical thinking. At Stanford Business School, I had an entire semester on critical analytical thinking. Angelo, I did not have one class on underthinking, on non-judgmental thinking, right? So we wonder, why do we default to that? Why do we over rotate? It's because that's what we've been trained. That's where we've been rewarded, right? And yet if you examine your kind of breakthrough moments, they don't come from being overcritical. They don't come from overthinking. Rarely. They come from, like I've heard a quote I love: the history of innovation is the bed, the bus, and the bathtub.
That is a good one.
And it speaks to what happens in sometimes these in-between moments when it's not that we're overthinking, but I mean, I think overthinking, by the way, is critical preparation. Don't get me wrong. We have to prime the brain for the breakthrough, but the breakthrough moment often, you could say it's a function of overthinking insofar as someone does need to kind of exhaust known avenues, but it's, there's something that happens beyond overthinking. And that beyond overthinking is kind of, it's the bathtub moment. It's the light bulb moment in bed. And that is where, if we actually become aware of that, Einstein, whenever he was stuck on a physics problem, you know what he did? He picked up his violin,
Nice.
and he, because he knew, I've got to think differently. And right now there's, I think, a generation of people who don't understand the value of thinking differently. They just want to, put their head down, grind the pencil to the nub, work harder, rather than looking up and saying, what else could I try? What else could I do? How could I get my mind in a different state? If I want to get out of the box, why not leave the box?
Jeremy, I probably got about 7 questions. We may need to go super rapid fire. Here it goes. Speaking of the before mentioned founder of Y Combinator, Paul Graham, he states original ideas don't come from trying to have original ideas. And you hinted at this earlier. He noted they come from trying to build or understand something slightly too difficult, which to me relates to a definition of flow.
I love that.
I agree. That does make a lot of sense. If you, a little bit like the 5% of your students, when Are You Creative, only 5% raise their hand, and most of them probably being a little timid about it, almost as if it's something bad. If you were to ask me, am I creative? I'm going to think about it for a second or two, and I'm going to go no, because I tend to think of, am I creating music? Although I do dabble in poetry. Am I an artist in the traditional sense of the word? My definition is too in the box and too limited.
Yes.
Sadly, when I ask family members, and I ask when I speak at universities and colleges, and I bring these weird topics into the family office world, it's a long story. A little bit like your experiment at Stanford, I get a pretty similar response. Like I wish I was, I'm just not. I'm more analytical. I like to have more information. How do we get people like, bullshit, you're wrong? Snap out of that. And I know I'm giving you, a minute to answer this question.
No,
what is the technique we could do to be more creative?
Well, I think one simple thing is diagram your last breakthrough. So think of the last time there was a moment where you go, oh, that would be cool, or oh, we should totally do, it's a relatively simple activity, but have someone do it. I'll give an example. I was working with a company in Japan. I spent a lot of time in Japan with Japanese companies. And I asked this group, diagram your last breakthrough, and then just tell me, and then kind of describe it as a process. And when did it happen and how did it happen? And then ultimately what you want to do is then you want to implement that kind of process, right? But, systematize it, operationalize it. So one woman, she said, well, the last time I got like a new idea on a project, I was talking to a stranger on the train. And the stranger in this conversation said something that made me realize, oh, that's what we should do. And it was this amazing moment. And then I just immediately, what was obvious to me, the next thing I said was, so do you do that now? And she said, do I do what? And I said, do you talk to strangers on trains? And she sat back and she goes, I should. Right. And the point is, you have had a breakthrough. You have had a moment where you go, where'd that come from? Whoa, this happens to me all the time. And for me, if you just start to diagram what were the component parts of that moment, then you can start to say, what if I actually tried that again? Could I, rather than like, because for most people, breakthrough is more like a break-in, catches them off guard. Where'd that come from? Right? Could you think about perpetrating a breakthrough? What if you committed a breakthrough? I think for some people, there's a paradigm. It's like, what if you go on the offensive? What if you even tried? Literally for this woman, it's like, talk to a stranger every day for a week. See what happens. I think that most people think it's binary. I have it or I don't. They don't think about growing it. They don't think about cultivating it. They don't think about nurturing it. If they see that it's something that they have to give attention, not just in an artistic manner. Granted, not everyone's artistic. So what? That has no bearing on creativity. Not to say that arts can't contribute to the creative impulse, But to say you are not artistic is not to say you're not creative. And so don't mistake the two, as it sounds like you have. I would encourage everyone,
Yes, I believe so.
look at the moments that you've broken through and,
Is there any
and call it creativity. Say that was creative.
people, and I wish we had more time to talk about Da Vinci and other things as well. People that are either what I define as artistic, my definition of creative, has there been any legitimate research, or your anecdotal, but really more legitimate, that would show, yes, we did an MRI brain scan and they're different and here's how?
They're not.
And do you think that IQ, measurable IQ, plays into creativity? Is it actually, does it help you? Arguably, does it hurt? Is it neutral? Or it's unknown, the research isn't there?
I think I would give, I mean, we've already talked about IQ. There's of course a baseline, similar to how there may be like a baseline level of income which actually affects your happiness. Beyond it, your happiness is not impacted. There's a baseline level of IQ, which I would assume anyone listening to this podcast has surpassed. Beyond that level of IQ, there's nothing more needed for creativity, right?
And
But one thing I want to say is, I think how most folks think is, you say, is there IQ that's dangerous? I would say there's a level of expertise that can be dangerous, because in a rapidly changing environment, a knowledge of what's worked before can prevent you from discovering new things and can prevent you from seeing new paradigms. And so one watch out is specifically when you're particularly expert. I just wrote about this on my blog this week. There's a great exercise. It's literally the blog post from this week on my website. Talk about this challenge that we do at Stanford all the time. It's called the Spaghetti Marshmallow Challenge. And it basically demonstrates there's a very fun and simple activity. Anybody can replicate it in their office if they want to try. That shows there's biases at play that keep us from solving problems. And there's and the challenge is, sometimes we think we're expert when we're not. That's all I'll say about that exercise if somebody wants to do it. The danger of our expertise is we expect it to extend to areas we unconsciously expect it will extend to areas that it does not. And then it fails us because we acted like an expert rather than like a beginner.
I'm going to have two 10-second questions before I do that, in case you literally just had to bounce out the door. I highly recommend you follow Jeremy. I believe it's Jeremy Utley. Is that on X?
Yeah, on X. I probably post most on LinkedIn. That's kind of my most consistent area. You feel free to subscribe to my newsletter. I've got a newsletter and all sorts of resources on my website too.
And it's pretty much as you would expect. Jeremy Utley, Utley. The book, by the way, is Idea Flow, the only business metric that matters. I highly recommend follow, subscribe, reach out, go to Stanford, do what you got to do. Okay, my final boom, boom, boom. Psychedelics, does that have an impact on creativity?
I think I've never experimented myself. I think the research seems to indicate that there are benefits to dissociative thinking, and that psychedelics contribute to dissociation. And so I think, while I've never assigned or partaken myself, to any of my students, I mean, there's certainly what seems to be a growing body of research that suggests that they can be beneficial. And so I would say that's probably a personal decision that individuals have to make, probably in consultation with healthcare professionals, et cetera. But I would not write them off, wholesale, writ large, because of, a particular bias or moral stance without understanding what you're talking about.
And it's probably more on focus and productivity, but I was going to ask you if you have any opinion, I think a little related, on nootropics.
I don't know much about nootropics, to be honest with you.
Okay. And last question, a little tongue-in-cheek and VC-centric, since that's your background. Yeah. I kind of agree with, if I pronounce his name correctly, the one and only Chamath Palihapitiya, that a lot of VC, it's an insider's game, and I mean really an insider's game, like Peter Thiel, the PayPal Mafia, Y Combinator. They know who's going to win or be successful. And Chamath here, Chamath, don't yell at me, a little bit of an embedded Ponzi scheme. A little bit of, they're taking off because we're putting more money behind them. Let's put more money. Let's get Ron Conway. Let's get Thiel. Let's get Elon. it's really hard for an outsider. I don't care if you're a billionaire, you're still an outsider to be successful in early stage venture capital. Good luck.
Mm,
Your opinion?
mm. It's incredibly difficult to be successful. I think many more VC firms fail than succeed. You know,
Yes.
it's a numbers game. It's a statistics game. I think that it's possible that folks have unfair advantage, and that folks who aren't in the game could have unfair advantage. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, it's competitive advantage. I don't mean unfair as in unethical. But I think
Mhm.
there's some people, maybe it's because of your network, your access, your knowledge that gives you an advantage. That's a wonderful thing to exploit. I think probably what the numbers suggest is more people think they have an unfair advantage than actually do, and it's a hard game to run.
Jeremy, you've been beyond grateful and extended with your time. I greatly appreciate it. Again, Jeremy Utley, follow him, go to Stanford, newsletter, blog, Substack, whatever you're doing. Definitely go and buy the book. I'm going to give my own personal close. I know you have to run, so you can exit. I'll be about 2 or 3 minutes, audience. Hope you enjoy it. But Jeremy, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jeremy. It was my pleasure. Really cool outtake you got there. I got to do something like that. Thank you so much for your time. Look forward to the next time.
Likewise.
And everyone, I am Angelo Robles, founder of Family Office TV, exit from many a decade at Family Office Association, and founder of my own private club called SFO Continuity. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation, and I tried to bring it into business, finance, and family offices, and I think so. Because at family offices, we're more than just making family office or investment decisions. The opportunity for us to be creative, for us to be problem solvers, and some of the aspects that we could take and implement that, I think are above and beyond just simply another conversation about family governance, about philanthropy, about hedge funds. All cool. I love them. But I do like to do things a little differently and think that some of my questions, which you may not always like, and that's okay, are a little different. I wish I had a little more time to dive into even the ones relative in a variety. I left a whole bunch, trust me, on the cutting room floor, which is why I like 2-hour interviews. But there's lots to cover. I think this is a great subject. I talk all the time. You need to be a historian and a revolutionary. You do have to see around corners. Stop this negative mindset that you're not creative. You are. And I think Jeremy helped to prove that. And the work that I do with family offices, with principals, with rising generation, and with executives, I think is very impactful. So being a part of my private club, my SFO Continuity, go to angelorobles.com, go to the membership tab. It couldn't be any easier. I kept it overly simple and easy for those that are interested to be among my first 30 founding, what I call charter members, and be a part of something special that, sure, digital content, best practices, intellectual dialogue, sharing information, that's all great. Nothing beats face to face, which is why we have both New York and Palm Beach, depending on the season, as our core hubs, hosting soirees, roundtables, private lunches, and dinners, bringing in people like Jeremy, bringing in investment titans like Liam Cooperman, who I interviewed earlier this week, people that have invested. His name is George. I'm not going to give his last name, in over 900 private companies, and then engaging with them as fellow wealth creators and entrepreneurs, and then having our own private discussion and going back and forth, what we're investing in, what's the problem, what's keeping us up at night, how can we solve this problem? There's not enough of this. You think that you're getting this in a lot of things in business and the family office world. You're not. I've been in this community forever, and I made mistakes. I needed to be humbled. Now I think the opportunity that I clearly understand that the members have mentioned to me in terms of what they want and what's important, and I want you to be a part of it. Of course you have to pay. I'm a capitalist. It's a for-profit business. The opportunity for the first 30 is special. I'll never have this kind of pricing. That's one specialty of it again. And the opportunity for you to say and be a part of committees and help launch that and have the opportunity to shape the direction is really this one time. Because after that, once I hit 30, I'm going to take a pause. We're going to work collectively together and then build out from there. Maybe quicker, but never at that opportunity to have quite that say and that pricing that someone could get now. I have amazing relationships. Nothing wrong with New York in the spring and summer, Palm Beach in the winter and fall, sprinkled in there a little bit of my work in Europe, like in Vienna, which I really enjoy. The Hamptons, of course, a little bit of that, and Martha's Vineyard, I hope in the summer. And I love all communities, Dallas, Chicago, Minneapolis. I love Arizona. I love LA, Silicon Valley. Those are all areas where I'm open to developing further chapters, more activity, and more face to face. And simply, I want you to be a part of it. I'm not looking for big scale. I'm not looking for sponsors per se. I want real wealth creators, rising generation family members and family office executives, people that make decisions that have an impact and want to be a part of something truly special. So, okay, you got a little bit of my commercial. You know where to go, angelorobles.com. Go to membership and jump in, join before the opportunity, I don't know, mid-late summer kind of escapes relative to the quote unquote 30 members. I hope you enjoyed today's dialogue. These are some of the out of the box conversations that I like to have, that I have deep connectivity with experts, some fluidity myself, and love to work with the families and the family offices, thinking beyond the traditional things, which if you do what everyone else is doing, you'll just be average. Average is not good enough. I want family offices to go from that to good and from good to great. And there are steps to follow, things to do, connectivity in the community that could help you be more productive and reach those goals. And those are the things that excite me. So follow me on my social media platforms at Family Office and Family Office TV. So too on YouTube, definitely LinkedIn, where I'm probably most active. You'll find me, Angelo Robles. And really, to learn, it's not great. I'm working on my site, but what we do and to join what I just said, or even bifurcate one or two of my master classes that I have very reasonably priced, simply go to angelorobles.com. So again, thank you all for watching today. I hope you enjoyed it. Jeremy was a great guest. I learned so much and I appreciate all of you. Thank you.